Hello guys and welcome to this new video. This is again what this series kind of does, is to address some of the most requested questions of videos that I get pretty much on every single video I upload. So this is going to be one of them, and this is like, when do I leave my lane as a support, and when do I rotate, and where do I rotate, and why do I rotate. So this is what this video is going to be about. I'll try and give you some different scenarios on when to rotate. I'll try and give you guys some behind the scenes into the thought process of what is going on. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is what is a rotation. Now, it's pretty simplistic, right? It's pretty simple stuff. A rotation is basically you move from one place to another. So let's say you start in duo, right? You want to rotate to the mid camp. So you are playing around mid for some reason, and then you want to rotate to the speed buff. So you're moving somewhere to gain a tactical advantage, or at least that's what you should be doing, right? So there's definitely it defines a good support and just a good player at Smite at all, knowing when to rotate and knowing what is going to be a good rotation and what's going to be a bad rotation. So you constantly have to weigh the pros and the cons of rotating. So a gank is pretty much also a rotation, and although this doesn't apply too much to supports, I guess with like Nasha and Fenrir and Amaterasu and some of those guys, you can definitely gank the ADC. Maybe you sneak up in solo, Bellona just ult or something, and you can get an Amaterasu ult, Fenrir ult, the Bellona, whatever, you can get a kill off that. But mainly ganks doesn't really apply too much to supports. But what I wanted to like kind of establish is that ganks is a rotation, but a rotation isn't necessarily a gank. So you can rotate for a bunch of different reasons. So it's a bit of an introduction to rotations, and if you can get really really good at knowing when to rotate and how to rotate, and just like making these split second decisions, that's going to improve your game so much. So the first question we're going to answer is, when do you leave your lane? Now, this is one of the questions. This is basically a question I get all the time, right? Like, when EmilZy, when do I leave my lane? I see in some videos you leave the lane at like 1 minute, and in some videos you do it at like 10 minutes, and usually it's just around like 3 or 4 minutes. So the very basic answer is that there's some criteria that you have to look at. So my first one I look at, is my ADC, is my AD carry in a good spot? Is my AD carry able to farm? Is my AD carry at risk of getting ganked if I'm not around? And of course, you're always at risk of getting ganked, but how high is the risk, right? Like, I want to apply pressure somewhere else on the map, not necessarily around ADC. So if my ADC is in a good spot, he's at the same level as the enemy ADC, he's not really, you don't really think he's going to get soloed, he's not too open to ganks because they're pressuring the other side of the map or whatever, then you're good to rotate. And another thing is, like, the ADC might not be at risk, but the ADC might have to give up stuff. So your ADC might have to give up their peril buff if the enemy hunter has pressure against him, or the enemy support is staying around duo more than you are. And losing that peril buff can actually put your hunter and yourself, your team, pretty far behind. So you gotta make sure, can my AD carry, can we like farm purple buff on rotation, or do we need to be there? And even if you need to be there for the purple buff, that doesn't mean that you have to sit in duo like for 2 minutes. You can just kind of rotate over whenever a purple buff is coming up, right? Because you pretty much want that buff regardless. And you can also like leave, like another thing about leaving your lane is, if you have the pressure in lane, why would you leave? Because you're forcing someone else to rotate. So let's say that you are pushing the enemy duo lane on the tower, and it's like 4 or 5 minutes into the game, and you have super high pressure. That means that if they don't want to lose their purple buff or even their red buff, they need to make rotations towards you. So the jungler and the mid laner, or like one of them at least, has to come and do something we call pressure relief. And if that happens, that means that you're going to have more people on one side of the map, and then you might be able to invade the back camp with the mid and the jungler, invade a blue buff. So you constantly have to like weigh up, where can I be on the map that makes the most sense for my team and where we gain the most. So if the lane is pretty stalled, or like there's no real kill potential, there's no real invade potential, it's simply too risky, I think you're just good to leave your lane. Of course, there's other scenarios where like you just need to leave your lane. Let's say that the speed buff is getting invaded at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, which is usually when it respawns, and your jungler calls out, they're definitely going to invade this, I'm going to need you here, otherwise we're just going to get so far behind. Then you just kind of have to back and dip and go there. But that's like a very specific situations, right? Perhaps the enemy support is starting somewhere else on the map, they're doing a different strategy, then you also got to leave duo early. But in general, I leave duo around when I can back for my boots, whether that's like boots 2 or full boots, something like that. Usually after my first back is when I like to leave duo, just because I feel like at that point I'm not really doing too much in duo. I should, if we had a good laning phase, have my ADC in a pretty good spot, or purple buff shouldn't be at the highest risk, but at the same time we probably won't be able to invade too much. But if I'm playing like Fenrir or Nasha, like super high pressure, and we've been getting like first bloods in the duo lane, and if they're pushing on the tower, of course I'm going to stay around there, and I'm going to try and keep on invading the purple buff. I'm going to try and keep applying pressure, so they're forced to do something, otherwise the ADC is just going to get out the game. So that's kind of when you want to leave your lane as a support. It's very, very game dependent. So let's talk about counter rotations real fast, and then we'll get into more scenarios on like when to leave your lane. So I can give some more examples. So counter rotations. What is a counter rotation? Now a counter rotation is like the most basic thing besides rotations, right? So if you're laning and the enemy support goes to mid, you can counter rotate by also going to mid, and that means that the pressure like equalizes, right? More so, I think counter rotation comes in when it comes to ganks. So let's say the jungler is ganking and you won't be able to make it there at the same time, but you'll be like 5 or 10 seconds later. Then you can let your teammate know, all right, well, I'm gonna counter rotate. I'll be there in like 5 or 10 seconds after him. So if you can just stay alive, we can outnumber them on this side of the map because we can counter rotate. And this is where wards comes in a lot. But I have a totally different video on wards, so you should definitely go check that out as well. It still applies. So when do you decide to counter rotate? Because it's not always that, let's say you're having dual pressure pushing the enemy under the tower, their support might just be like, well, we're losing this game anyway, or like this lane anyway, so I might just go and help my jungler invade the enemies or like our back camps, because that peril buff is gone. Then you have a decision to make. Am I gonna rotate with the enemy support that I might be a bit ahead of, and not invade the purple buff, or am I going to go to just stay in lane and invade the purple buff, maybe get the tower, push the enemy on the tower? So you constantly have to decide like what's a good counter rotation, what's a bad counter rotation. And this is also like a lot about split push and stuff if you go late into the game. I don't want to get too much into that though, because this is specifically for the early game. But counter rotations is definitely important, and it's also more so it's just like being where the enemy support is, just to kind of equal out the pressure. If not, you might have more pressure, might have less pressure, but you kind of want to be where he is, whether that's your back camps, your speed buff, your purple getting invaded. But sometimes you can get something else. So let's say that he's there for your purple buff, then you might go with your jungler to the enemy's blue buff and get that, and then you're kind of trading evenly. But you constantly have to say, well, are we going to lose a dual wave? Are we going to lose a mid wave? Maybe our back camps are exposed. So you need to be able to see, like, what are we losing and what are we gaining, and you want to try and outbrain the enemy so you can get more. And this is one of the things we're really fucking good at on Obey, was just playing the map, I guess, with like constantly trying to get the most out of a situation. So if we see that they're 4-man grouping for a red buff or a speed buff, well, we're just going to send 4 people to their side of the map and farm their buffs, because what are they gaining? They're 4-man splitting a speed buff, and, well, we're just invading their back camps. Even if we only get 2 back camps, that's way worth it, because we can push their waves on the tower. So it's a whole different aspect. But let's get into some of the scenarios specifically I wanted to talk about, because that should also explain the whole counter rotation, and when to leave lane a lot better. So let's go systematically through, I guess. Like, so we have solo, you have the jungle, you have the mid, you have duo, and that's where you can rotate to. So more specifically, we'll just go through them in like one by one. So if you're support and you want to rotate to solo, there's 3 main factors on why you would want to rotate to solo. The first thing is invade. So if you are like, if your soul laner is ahead and you want to invade, or your soul lane is stronger and you want to invade the enemy's blue buff just to give him a lead, then you might want to rotate. But then you also gotta look at what may I lose for rotating. So if I rotate to the blue buff, or purple buff might get invaded, or red buff might get invaded because I won't be there. So is the is getting, in my case, is getting there for this blue buff going to do more in the long term for us as a team than losing my red buff, which means Zeros won't have that, or Vote won't have that, right? Or like purple buff. So you constantly have to weigh out these factors of like how hard can we abuse getting a blue buff compared to them getting another red buff or another purple buff. And if the enemy support is there, well, then you're probably going to have a team fight or like a tiny fight, right, around the blue buff. And then you got to look at, are we going to be able to win that fight? But that's also kind of another topic. But one scenario can be that you want to invade the enemy blue buff, then you definitely want to rotate for that. If you get called over and you can see, well, this is pretty beneficial to us. They can't really invade anything from us. So if I can rotate for this, this is going to get my soul laner really far ahead. The other thing you can rotate to solo for is pressure relief. So pressure relief is kind of the opposite of invading. It's just like making sure that your soul laner gets the blue buff and also making sure that your soul laner can farm like safely, right? So let's say someone is playing a super aggressive warrior or something in solo and you're playing like Sobek or something, right? And you're just getting pushed on the tower, you keep losing minions, then you might want to rotate over to help out your soul laner, just so clear a wave with him. And that means he might actually regain some pressure, or like just rotate over to do his blue buff. Maybe your jungler's busy doing mid camps with your mid laner, invading some back camps or something. So that's another thing. The third thing when you want to rotate to solo, early game specifically, is if your soul laner is just dumpstering and he's super far ahead, but you've been getting kind of dumpstered in duo, what you can do is you can just kind of stroll over and split some waves with him and get some farm that way, like the easy way, because you're going to lose your purple buff on the other side of the map regardless. So this is like the main three scenarios where I would rotate to solo. It's all about the blue buff and it's all about like, can I get some farm? But that's more later into the game. Let's talk about the jungle. So in the jungle, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you can invade the enemy speed buff and you can make a rotation for that. And usually as a support, I like to sit around the mid lane because then I basically have the shortest route to like pretty much any rotation I can make. That's why I think it's so good. That's why I think that people just play around mid, right? Because then you have the shortest path to purple, shortest path to blue, rather than if you are sitting in duo, you're gonna have to run so far to get to blue and vice versa, right? So that's why supports and junglers also mainly play around mid and share mid waves, just so you can rotate faster to the different sides to the different sides of the maps. It's just being proactive, I guess. So if you want to invade the enemy speed buff, your jungler's like, yo, this guy, let's say you're playing against Mercury, he just ulted, we got his beats, maybe I'm playing Ares, so I'm like, okay, let's just go for this invade. If I can ult him, he's gonna get pulled in, we're gonna get the kill, we're gonna get the speed buff. Then I can rotate for that. Another thing is if you want to defend your own speed buff, specifically early game, it can be super important that your jungler gets his first few speed buffs. I remember an SPL game we had where I pretty much just backed at like 2 minutes and just went to a speed buff. I think it was against the old rival back when I was on energy, and we got 2 kills just because I made that rotation super early on. We got 2 kills, we got our speed buff, and we kind of won the game of that rotation alone, and just managed to like snowball off that. So that was a really good rotation, and by being able to back and just running there, I was way faster than Carlos, who obviously had to run all the way from duo to there. So that's also a shorter rotation for me, which is one thing as well, I guess, like length of rotation. The longer the rotation, the better the gain has to be, if that makes sense. Back camps is a super essential part of Smite. There's like, it's the jungler's main point of farm, it's the main point to like push a lead. And it's also the safest buff to invade by far, just because it's so easy to kill, and it's just in a less disadvantaged position than let's say purple buff or speed buff, obviously being like way further back. Back camps on duo side is obviously super risky to invade, but if you're playing like a mobility jungler or something, like your jungler can invade that fairly easily. So mainly you want to focus on the solo side back camps, and if you can get control over both solo side back camps, you're gonna be set. Like you don't even need to pick a fight. You can just get your own buffs and keep invading their solo back camp and make sure you get mid camps, so you can just win the game off that. So if your back camps keep getting invaded, you're gonna get a call out at some point like, guys, I need my back camp. Then you just need to be there on time. And then again, you have to say, is that better than what I might lose in solo or duo, right? Like, so it's kind of about the jungle when I like to rotate. So sometimes I'm gonna rotate super early just because I need to give an advantage, and they have so much pressure that I just straight up need to back. And even if I'm giving up my purple buff, we're still gonna get our speed buff and maybe get a few kills, and that's more. It's better for us to lose a purple buff than a speed buff, right? So around mid, pretty much just mid camps, right? Because mid is where you definitely just want to be. Like this is when you share, like by default, there's sometimes where you don't need to share, but you can still be around mid. So say your mid laner is super far behind and you might have a bit of a lead, you can just make sure that you zone yourself and let the mid laner solo farm. But most of the time, that's still a pretty bad idea, just by the way splitting works in Smite and the low XP bonus, lowest level on your team bonus works. So I definitely say try and split. But if your junglers are behind as well and your mid lane is a bit behind, let them two-man split the wave, and you can just try and be around the mid camps by making pressure in such a way, right? One other thing I completely forgot about is like you can create pressure, which is what rotations are all about, by just like making half rate rotations, and that's just like say that your ADC is getting pushed on the tower. If you show yourself on some wards, if you take an aggressive path on the mid camps, the enemy ADC is instinctively gonna react by just backing off, and that way you're kind of creating fake pressure, which is one thing we do quite a bit. Is just kind of stroll around wards just to say, okay, well, we don't know where EmilZy is right now. He might be around mid, he might be around duo. Play back, right? Like that's one thing you can do as well. If you don't have anything to do, that's kind of why we got on this topic. If you don't have anything to do, you can't really split mid. You don't really want to split duo. Nothing's going on solo. Just run around the jungle and try and show up on some wards, and that's gonna push the enemy back. Of course, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you can get picked though. So around mid, the whole point about being around mid as well is because you want to secure neutral farm. So you have the enemy jungle and you have your own jungle, which realistically most of the time, unless you're just chain invading, that's pretty set. And then where you win the game or like you get ahead is around the neutral farm. That's the mid camps, which spawns every 1 minute and 30 seconds, and it's the oracles which spawns every third minute. So you want to be on timer for these mid camps, and you want to be there, and you want to make sure that you are in an advantageous position. So that means getting up the sentry wards, that means getting up the wards and such, right? Besides that, I guess when it comes to mid camps, it's super important that you have like a good timing around it. And that means if you have 1000 gold in hand, you're like half mana, maybe 70% health, then you're not fit to fight, you know. It's specifically in early game, 1000 gold is like, that's like a bunch of extra stats. And obviously do not having health and mana, so try and time your backs around mid camps. It's kind of hard to do, but in general, like what I like to do is just back like every third, fourth minute, kind of depending on how much my gold gain is and how much health and mana I have, and then time it with, by the time I'll be around mid, that's like 5 or 10 seconds before the mid camps can spawn, so we can get our sentry wards up, and we can be in a position inside the mid camps. So not only does then we have to push up back, but then they have to secure the mid camps themselves. Oracles is a bit different, and so it's like soul lane mid camps, because the soul lane and ADC can rotate, but that's like up to the soul lane and ADC. And obviously the most, like, the thing that happens the most is that you just split mid camps. So say that one team goes to one mid camp, you're like, oh well, we might as well just take the other and just call it even, right? I think that's fine as well. But if you feel like you can definitely get both mid camp and you're stronger, you want to try and fight. And then there's like off timings, I guess, around the mid camps. When it comes to off timings, like if you're really far ahead, right, but you keep splitting mid camps because you're just going for one of them and you're fine with that, you might just want to wait like 10 seconds with killing the mid camp, because that means that you'll have time to do one mid camp and then the other one will spawn by the time you get there. So that's one thing you can do with buffs as well, just kind of put them off timer. It's one thing we did a lot on energy as well. When we would in-rate the enemy red buff, we'd make sure that our speed buff was offset by like a minute. So like adapting would clear speed at like 3 minutes, and then red buff would spawn at 4 minutes. That meant that they can't invade our speed in return and just give up their red buff, and also adapting will have like a speed buff, right? So it's another big thing. Lastly, duo. When do I need to rotate back to duo then if I rotate away? Because you want to stay most of the game around mid. If the ADC is of risk of getting ganked, say he has bad wards or he's getting pressured on the tower or something, or you see someone on a ward, you want to make one of those counter rotations we talked about, right? Then you can rotate over, and then you're giving pressure relief. That's pretty much the main thing in duo, and also in solo. It's just pressure relief and pressure. Like it's all you need to know. And is me counter rotating here gonna give us more than me staying in mid? Because my ADC can just play on the tower and potentially won't get dived, right, most of the time, and we might be able to get a backcamp off that. But what's worth it? What's better in the long term? Is my carry gonna lose too much gold? What's going on? And of course, if your purple buff is getting chain invaded, you can also rotate to do pressure relief. I really like personally to just every second minute, I'm just there for the purple buff, to share some farm, to pick up the buff, to make sure we get that. Because if your ADC just gets the purple buff, he might farm the back camps once in a while, and he's just farming the lane, he's gonna be fine. And the ADCs is also just kind of more like late game. I think early mid game they're more like objective killers, if that makes sense. They're more like objective damage, and then late game they can really start to chunk. But in general, the ADC is just like objective damage, right? But yeah, that's pretty much different scenarios in which I like to rotate. Like the main scenarios where you want to rotate. Like you don't just want to. The worst thing you can do is just rotate for the sake of rotating. We're like, well, I don't know what the fuck to do. I guess I'm just gonna go to duo and share. I'm just gonna go to solo and share. You need to have a reasoning behind it, and you need to be aware what's the benefits and what are the cost of what I'm doing. It's like, run a quick cost benefit analytics, and you're gonna be set. Let's talk about when not to rotate. I've talked about this quite a bit as well, so we just kind of go over this pretty fast. But if an objective is at risk, what is the benefit of rotation compared to the counterplay to the rotation? So let's say that you want to invade the enemy's speed buff, and you go with the jungler, the mid laner to support, and the soul laner. That means that the enemy team might just be able to give up the speed buff and do like Gold Fury, or vice versa. You're invading the red buff, they might be able to do the Pyromancer with like 3 people, right? So you want good wards, and you need to know that this is a certain risk. So let's say that they go for Gold Fury, right? Like you invade the speed buff, they get Gold Fury. What can you do as a counterplay to their rotation? Well, then you might be able to get the back camps, even the blue buff, and then go and do Pyromancer, and then that's fine. That's all right for you, right? So you constantly need to be aware of like what can the enemy do with us doing this, and that's like the super hard part. And that's what everyone thinks of at a higher level, which is also why I think that people are playing around mid is so much more common in competitive than like ranked or casuals. Because in ranked and casuals, everyone's just kind of doing their own thing, farming. People are more selfish, I guess, and don't really care too much about how the team is doing. So that also means that you might stay longer in duo, or you might just camp solo or something, and there's not really too much counterplay. And even if your soul lane is getting dived on the tower by 3 people, you might not even pull gold, because you're like, well, I gotta do this back camp, I really gotta push this mid wave, right? If a person is behind, and you're still rotating, but you're literally gaining nothing by rotation, I guess. So like, let's say my Deathwalker is super far behind, but he can still clear his wave, right? Like he's still playing a warrior. He maybe is laning against Sobek. He can just heal up, like he's playing Bellona or whatever. He doesn't really need a rotation because he's still getting his buff, he's still getting his farm, so he might not need rotation. One big thing as well is if you are playing, let's say, Hell support or any support like that's kind of squishy and doesn't really have a way to escape an Odin cage, you probably want to try and rotate away from the Odin, because otherwise you're just going to be a detriment to your team. Same goes with Ares. If you're playing like Bacchus or something, try and constantly be where they aren't, and try to make sure that you're getting even trades. So even if that Ares is going to be able to invade your red buff, well, then just go help out your soul laner with invading the blue buff or something. So there's different factors that just constantly plays in of like, are we stronger to fight? Then you might want to be more invasive, and if not, you might want to be more defensive or like tradable minded, I guess. But as you guys can hear, like this is just an art. It's so hard to come with like a specific example of like, this is what to do. But in most games, what you need to know is that you need to rotate after you get your boots to mid, and then when you come to the middle lane, you need to make a decision on where is my team going to gain the most by me being, right? And like maybe the jungler is right. Like as a support, you're pretty much a second jungler, but you are not. The jungler's objective is more so to gank and farm, where your objective more so is to help out the jungler and do pressure relief. But maybe the jungler is pretty far ahead, and he's like doing just a lot of pressure relief by himself, by just the fact that he's so fat and no one can like really kill him. So the jungler is just kind of running around and they're scared of him. Well, then you can do something that might not have been too beneficial if your jungler wasn't that big or like that scary. Say adapting's like a level 17 camera slots and then jungle's level 13, right? He might not need help invading the back camps because he'll pretty much just 2v1 anyone that goes there. Then you might be able to go to duo and just help your ADC push in the tier 1 tower, or you can do pyromancer with your soul laner or something. When there's pretty much nothing to game, you don't want to rotate. Like, there's no reason to rotate. There's always going to be a better thing to do. One of the best people at like rotating and pushing into the max is like Captain Twig and Ice Ice Baby. They're so insanely good. That's more so like not supports, but just in general at constantly knowing counterplays, right? So let's say you're doing Fire Giant, you just kind of wiped rival, but Ice Ice is alive. He won't just like kind of get mad and just clear wave. He'll instantly just like beeline and check your speed buff. He'll check your red buff. He'll check your pearl buff. He'll get the most out of the situation. So definitely be around that. And if someone is bluffing a rotation, which is also kind of like half counter rotation or like fake pressure, as I said, you might want to be too careful with just like going all in, right, for that rotation. Because if you're just running around behind the enemy support all the time and he's just kind of wiggling around, you might just get too far behind in farm, and that's really bad. So let's get to a conclusion, because this has been quite a bit of information. Rotations are definitely very complex and super game depending. There's so many factors. Where do we have pressure? Where do we need pressure? Where do we need pressure relief? Does the enemy have like an Odin and Ares or something I need to be aware of? What level of play am I playing at? Am I playing ranked where people are more selfish? Well, then I might be able to abuse that in one way or another, right? And I also think like that kind of goes with the higher level you play at and the more coordinated your team is, the more and the earlier rotations you'll see in general. Otherwise, it's just people kind of doing their own thing, and then you'll group up when someone decides to take the flag, the leadership banner, and just say like, all right, well, let's just go gold now, and then you just group up for the rest of the game. But that's pretty much rotations. As a base rule, get your boots, go to mid. Do I need to help my solo? Do I need to help my ADC? Do I need to help my jungler? Are we invading? Are we not invading? How are we going to set ourselves up for the mid camps in the best way possible? So that's pretty much rotations. If you guys have any questions, I'm sure you have questions, because this might have just confused you even more than helped you. But that's really what it is. It's the same as picks and bans, right? It's super hard, and it only comes with like, you can like think it out, and it comes with like, obviously like, what's the word? Like try and error, right? Like trial, and it comes with like, not history isn't the word. I'm completely missing the word. Hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying. Like, the more games you play, the better you get at it, pretty much. And I forgot the word for that. But one thing I will not forget is my my usual, I almost forgot that, my usual outro. So I do hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe, press the bell. Until next time, everyone, peace out.